So welcome for our session on health systems preparedness for early detection. My name is Soeren Mattke. I'm a professor at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and I've spent the better half of the last 5 years thinking about health systems preparedness for a disease-modifying Alzheimer's treatment, and finally we are getting there. So with the treatment, not with the preparedness. So I have a brief presentation, and then we will have short presentations without slides by Perneczky and Lydia Lanman, and a video from Craig Ritchie, who couldn't come here because of a family emergency, and then a lot of time for discussion. So why am I so interested in early detection? I mean, as I said, we are getting close to having disease-modifying Alzheimer's treatment. You probably all saw the lecanemab data coming out last week. I was trying to get Lydia drunk to give me when the Roche data would come out, and she wouldn't talk. And we are waiting for Lilly in probably March next year. But since these drugs are pretty similar with respect to their mechanism of action, we are probably getting to a point where we'll actually treat Alzheimer's disease in its early stage pretty soon. And that really changes the paradigm of how we think about this disease. Right? Because this disease can only be treated in very early stages, mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia, and that actually is not the stage at which we currently diagnose the disease. Right? There was a study that looked at about 80% of randomly selected patients in a memory clinic who were just diagnosed, and they were all 80% were moderate or severe dementia, i.e. outside of the treatable range. US, there were some survey data analyses where people looked into surveys that are linked with cognitive assessment data, and they saw that between 11 and 15% of patients with MCI actually had a diagnosis given to them by their doctor. Similarly, study in Germany, 11 to 12% detection rate at the MCI stage, 6% in another study. So it's pretty consistent around single digits to 10% and change, which is a disaster if you ask me, because this is exactly the time when we want to treat the condition, and so we have to figure out a way to find these people a lot earlier. And we have to start doing that soon because health systems don't really move that fast. So this is the background for the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, which is an outgrowth of almost a decade now of international collaborations, starting with a G7 summit in the UK with then Premier David Cameron, who kind of spearheaded a dementia agenda at the G7 level. The World Health Organization picked it up, the G20 picked it up, and then the World Economic Forum in collaboration with CEOI, which is a US-based charity, formed the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative to advance science and research into Alzheimer's disease. And one of their work streams is what I'm working on, which is the health systems preparedness work stream. So this is familiar to you: aging population, health systems that are not prepared to move from a care mode to a cure mode. And so we really have to get them to think differently about Alzheimer's disease, think about it like cardiovascular disease, where you detect very subtle symptoms, even preclinical states, and treat aggressively to prevent onset of severe disease. So the commitment of the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative is to implement national, regional, global ideas to improve access to early diagnosis and treatment. And we're actually targeting, this is not a small-scale project, about $100 million over the next 6 years. So this is kind of part of a larger ecosystem in health systems preparedness, Dementia Discovery Fund, the Diagnostics Accelerator, and then our Health Systems Transformation Project. So this is how this roughly looks. We split up the patient journey in this conceptual diagram, which will be soon published in Alzheimer's and Dementia. So starting from prevention, like activation, awareness for dementia, and then the more medicalized piece, the early diagnoses, and timely and accurate diagnosis. By the way, I'm happy to send you slides, no need to film everything. They're all public domain, no secrets here. So currently we're working on the screening and early detection, and the next work stream is going to be timely and accurate diagnosis. And then after that comes sort of the treatment commensurate with what stage the patients are being diagnosed. So this is how these flagship projects work. And we split the first node of this framework into two types of projects: flagships that use a relatively standardized approach to early detection in primary care, and then grant-driven projects where we had a global solicitation of research ideas and projects, sort of where they had to design their own approach, which might be similar but not identical to what we do in the flagships. So the flagship starts in primary care, either from a regular wellness visit or because of a memory complaint. We provide for primary care docs a digital cognitive assessment tool so that they can actually objectively document and quantify the degree of cognitive impairment, if any, and then trigger further steps. Of course, if no impairment is detected, we end there. And then if we see the impairment, it depends a little bit on the health system. So people might actually be sent to rule out other causes first, like structural brain processes, B12, thyroid, all these things that can cause cognitive impairment but are reversible. And then if those are ruled out, they would be sent to a blood test for the Alzheimer's pathology, which is also provided under the project. And that basically is the endpoint of the primary care node. And then again, it depends a bit on the health system, what happens to the patients next. We do this as a research project because we want to learn what are the obstacles in primary care to actually diagnose cognitive impairment in an earlier stage. So we do intake interviews prior to start of these pilots with clinicians. We do a baseline survey, and we also do exit interviews and a post-survey to see what has changed. We also measure detection rate against historical trends. And then we added these grant projects, and Robert is one of the ones that will run one in Germany. So as you can see, there are both flagship sites and grant projects all over the world. And they have slightly different approaches, but are sort of in spirit similar to what I just talked you through. So the one important thing is this is not research. This is not one of these things where we sponsor the development of an intervention, and when the PI has been able to publish the paper, the intervention dies. That's not the idea. We want to have models of care that can be sustained and can be scaled in a given context. And for that, we have created a community of practice, basically a self-help group of all the grant recipients and flagship projects, where they can come together, talk about lessons learned, talk about what works, what doesn't work, and try to sort of motivate and inform each other to improve their interventions, and also think about how can we make this routine care rather than project-based care. And the idea is to develop also a digital toolkit, which then in the end can be used for other sites that want to set up similar interventions. Okay, just very quickly, we are doing questions after Robert and Lydia have spoken, and so keep your questions for now, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session.
Okay, so apparently I'm next. Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Perneczky. I'm a practicing psychiatrist. I'm a professor at the University of Munich, head of the all-day psychiatry department at the University Hospital. And in Germany, we like to think that we have an excellent healthcare system which is prepared for pretty much everything. Well, we're not prepared for identifying dementia. We're not prepared for identifying very early stages of Alzheimer's disease in the community. And whenever I talk to primary care physicians, they're not really motivated to identify early stages, which makes perfect sense to me because currently there is no treatment, but that might change next year, 2 years from now. So we need to be better in identifying Alzheimer's disease in its earliest clinical stages to identify those most likely to benefit from those new drugs. So what we're planning to do, and the project that we designed will compare 3 different approaches to cognitive screening. And it's not only cognitive screening, the aim is to identify individuals with Alzheimer's disease pathology in the subjective complainer of subjective cognitive impairment stage in the community. So we have partnered with the St. John's Accident Assistance, Johanniter Unfallhilfe, which is a huge charity usually providing emergency care services. They have a large network of senior centers, social care centers, educational activities, and they will help us to target individuals in the community. So this is pre-primary care. It's not even a primary care population. It's actually a community-based cohort. So we will offer activities for seniors in those centers. We will ask them to participate in the study, and then we will cluster randomize the centers. And in cluster A, they will just get a questionnaire on their subjective cognitive complaints. In cluster B, they will get the questionnaire plus a digital cognitive test, and in cluster C, they will get a blood biomarker testing on top of that. And then we will tell them, please go and see your GPs. We will forward all those results to the GPs. We will not influence the decision that the GPs make, but we will provide them with the telephone number of our memory clinic, and we will explain what the results of the blood biomarker, the questionnaire, and the digital cognitive tests mean. We will not tell them what to do with those results. And then what we're mainly interested in is how this strategy, or which of these 3 different strategies is the best, has the best value for money also, to identify those who have Alzheimer's disease pathology in this population in Munich of seniors with subjective cognitive complaints. GPs will be allowed to send patients to our memory clinic where the participants will get the kind of full-blown, in-depth assessment with CSF biomarkers and PET imaging and what have you. And then hopefully at the end, we have a better understanding of the most feasible, best approach for this population in Munich, and something that we will be able to scale. And maybe just a questionnaire is enough to identify early Alzheimer's disease. Maybe the digital cognitive marker is helpful, and maybe we need blood biomarkers on top of that. Just as part of the disclosure, blood biomarkers are provided in kind by Roche on the Relixis platform, and the digital cognitive test is provided by ESI. It's what was previously called the Cogstate Brief Battery, now it's called Cognigram, a card sorting test, which I find very elegant because it is, it's not a language-based test, and it doesn't matter if you speak German or English or Turkish. It can be used by anybody. So it should be something which is really effective in the population and can be scaled easily. I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
By the way, I learned that questions will be through the platform anyway, so if you have any pressing questions, you can start entering them, and then we will get to them as we finish up the talks. And the next presentation will actually be a video recording by Craig Ritchie from Scotland, who couldn't travel but was kind enough to sit in front of his iPhone last night and record his remarks.
Hi, my name is Craig Ritchie. I'm Professor of Psychiatry of Ageing at the University of Edinburgh and the co-founder of Brain Health Scotland. And I'm really sorry, due to unforeseen circumstances, I can't be on the panel today in Bucharest, but I've been given the chance to spend 5 minutes, talking a little bit about what we've been doing here in Scotland with the DAC flagship project. It's probably worth starting off by talking a little bit about Brain Health Scotland. We established this new organisation within Scotland after discussions with the First Minister and Scottish Government from 2018 onwards, and we officially launched this new entity in April 2020. And essentially the purpose of Brain Health Scotland is to through improving or maintaining brain health across the life course in all the people of Scotland, we'd hope to reduce by doing so the incidence of dementia. And in its own right, that means we have to work at a public health and policy level. We work with targeted populations like sports players who maybe played contact sport, children with a family history of dementia, women who've been victims of domestic abuse and intimate partner violence. So different organisations and different groups have been coming together to work on some of those programmes. We have a thing we call the Brain Health Pyramid, the Brain Health Scotland Pyramid. And at the bottom of that pyramid is the public health and policy work. The next level up is our targeted populations I just mentioned. Third level up is the work we do in the community through what we call brain health hubs, where people can walk in and have conversations about brain health. And at the very top of the pyramid is the brain health clinics. And it's really those brain health clinics which have been a part of the work with the DAC flagship project. We, in 2020, started working on what we call the Scottish Model for Brain Health Services, which was published at the end of 2021 in the Journal of Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease. And it recognised that people living with dementia who are seen in memory clinics, those memory clinics are really working on making a diagnosis of dementia and providing post-diagnostic support. Whereas in a brain health clinic, it's more geared towards risk profiling, early disease detection, and putting in place what we call personalised prevention plans. Now, those personalised prevention plans may be the management of unknown medical comorbidities or unknown up to that point medical comorbidities like high blood pressure or diabetes or pre-diabetes even. But it's also looking at lifestyle risk factors and seeing if they can be optimised moving forward to reduce the rates of deterioration of neurodegenerative disease. And of course, what we hope for in the not too distant future is this will be a great access point for pharmacological interventions and disease-modifying therapies. So I think when we got involved with the DAC flagship project as one of the original sites, we were probably working in this space already, and what DAC did was really amplify or catalyse what we were planning to do in the service moving forward. So it's brought with it its challenges. I mean, we were obviously quite keen to be involved. We've got early detection philosophy already within Brain Health Scotland, but we didn't necessarily want to set this up as a research project, but rather set it up as a quality improvement project across the whole of Scotland, because the clinics that we're setting up are going to be a national service ultimately. So it made it exciting for us to try and use DAC at a whole nation level, if you like, within Scotland, rather than at an individual centre as a research project. And I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges we face, is how to translate the work of DAC, the actual operationalised work of DAC into our day-to-day practice. Not necessarily any distance between us in terms of the philosophy underpinning what we're trying to do. So I think I've probably reached my 5 minutes, and again I apologise that I can't be with you, I can't join the panel afterwards, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what we've been doing. Look at our website, www.brainhealth.scot. Read the Scottish Model paper. It's in, like I said, the Journal of Prevention of Alzheimer's Disease. And I hope the rest of the session goes really well, and look forward to talking with many of you again soon. Okay, bye.
Okay, thank you, Craig. If you can hear us, great that you made it possible. And now I invite Lydia Lanman to give a few remarks as our third panelist.
Thanks, Soeren. My name is Lydia Lanman, and I lead Roche's global policy efforts in Alzheimer's disease. So here representing Roche, which some of you may know, is a large global pharmaceutical as well as a drug developer focused on innovation, science, research, and discovery of pharmaceutical and diagnostic tools. And part of that also includes Alzheimer's disease. And so you're probably wondering what I'm doing up here. But as a pharmaceutical company, really we spend a lot of time talking about access, because science without access is science fiction. And this really couldn't be more true than in Alzheimer's disease. And, as we kind of consider, looking at first pharmaceutical, kind of new therapies that are coming to the market, diagnostic tools, we focus more on, looking at ensuring that gets to the patient and gets to clinicians to actually use it, because otherwise it's of no use and we aren't able to kind of see the outcomes and the value. And so in Alzheimer's disease, health systems really aren't prepared to welcome kind of the new innovations that are coming. And we've seen a lot of innovations in the field, and we will continue to see more. I think Soeren noted some. And so one of the areas that we work on a lot with the external community, including with multi-stakeholder consortia such as DAC and organizations such as yourself, is really to see where we can partner to develop solutions that can ensure that when those innovations are available, that they can be accessed in a kind of a timely way. And when we're looking at bringing new disease-modifying therapies to the market, to healthcare systems, to people that can benefit, one of the areas we've been focusing a lot of attention on is access to a timely diagnosis. And I think we probably want to go a bit further, and this is some of the stuff that's being done in DAC, is more about an accurate, timely diagnosis. So not just getting a diagnosis in time, but getting one that is biomarker-based, biomarker-confirmed. And not only is this important, kind of the value of knowing, so knowing kind of whether or not you have Alzheimer's disease, but this will become even more important when we have new innovative disease-modifying therapies available, as kind of to be eligible to receive those treatments, to get them reimbursed, will require demonstrating a biomarker-confirmed diagnosis. And so this is why I think the work that we're doing with DAC, and we'll hear about a bit more today, is really fundamental, to be able to kind of test, learn, and scale innovation, whether that be combining blood-based biomarker tools along with diagnostic digital tools. How do you ensure that someone gets access to either a PET diagnostic or a lumbar puncture through cerebral spinal fluid? This will be fundamental to unlock access to future innovations. So I think this is why I think you're going to. There's some incredible projects, not just the flagships, but also the granting projects. There's projects looking at how do you do mobile screening and allow then a referral to specialty. There's projects that combine specialties together, so ophthalmology and neurology together. There's a really cool project in Canada called Rectispect that does this. There's a equally really fun project, and not even fun, innovative project in Armenia, where they have a mobile van going around to underserved communities to look at how you can accelerate mobile detection. So really, it is about innovation, not just in kind of the drugs we're bringing or the diagnostic tools we're doing, but also innovation in healthcare systems and providing access to those innovations when they become available. So look forward to the questions, and I think we can probably share some, Soeren and I have worked together on a number of projects in terms of healthcare system readiness in this space, so we can, provide you some of the insights there, some of the learnings, and some of the opportunities for governments to act now, to prepare for a near future where there will be disease-modifying therapies available. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Lydia. So this is a highly unusual situation because we have G7 grade healthcare systems that are really not prepared to handle one of the most common diseases among their citizens. And the reason is that treating Alzheimer's is sort of a preventive paradigm because we can't reverse cognitive impairment. We can only prevent it from getting worse. So it is prevention. But it doesn't look like your prevention as we know it. Like you go to your doctor, you get a blood test and then a box of statins or a flu shot or whatnot. So highly scalable, dirt cheap, very easy, very safe, very well-established pathways. This looks more like high-end oncology care, right? Like you've just heard. Complex differential diagnosis, biomarker testing, advanced imaging, not an easy treatment decision in case of mixed etiologies. So this is nothing really that is that simple and that can be that quickly done in primary care. But then again, if we don't start in primary care, we never even get to the problem that we don't have the capacity to deal with patients. So where are we? Where can we go from here? We are interested to hear your stories. Where are you with cognitive detection in early stages in your country, your jurisdictions? What questions have you to that topic? I'm not seeing any coming in online, so please go ahead. Otherwise, we will just tell you jokes for the rest of the hour. Please. This gentleman first, and then you.
My name is Peter Kolominski-Rabas. I'm professor of neurology and epidemiology at University of Erlangen, and I think this is a really great idea because you are interested in the hurdles in primary care for detection. And I have a question to Robert Perneczky. I mean, you are collecting data in Munich in the St. John's service institutions. And to my knowledge, St. John's service institutions are one of the smallest providers in the metropolitan region of Munich. So we have Diakonie, Caritas, Arbeiterwohlfahrt. So this is a very small sample you are looking for. And the second thing is, I have some doubts, is you are looking on GP practices in metropolitan regions. And we know that the big problem we are facing in the European Union is that especially patients, people with dementia in rural areas are underestimated. So do you think that your data collection is representative? And do you think that your results will be transferred to other global health systems?
Thanks very much. I think the population is actually pretty large because we're not limited to centers run by the Johanniter Unfallhilfe. It's a network of different Alten- und Service centers and all the senior centers. We just have a meeting of all those senior centers next week, so this is not limited to Johanniter Unfallhilfe. So it's a pretty large population, and they seem to be quite motivated to support us. And then to the second question, no, this will not be a representative sample, but we believe that we will, it's a pilot study, and we believe if we can't implement something like this in a rich country, in the richest region of the rich country, then it will be impossible to do it in rural areas, in other parts of the world. So it's a pilot which we will then have to modify to other settings, I believe.
Gentleman on my left. Yes, you. Micro is coming.
Alexander Kurz, Munich. I see a discrepancy. I understand that in this global project you are trying to increase the number of people who are diagnosed with early stage cognitive impairment. But what about the availability of treatment once it has been approved at an estimated cost of $50,000 per year an individual? How do you go about this?
Well, I mean, the estimated costs at the last count was $26,000 a year, and that's a US price. So I fully expect that the prices in lower income regions will be not quite as high. We don't know what ASA will charge for lecanemab. We don't know what the others will charge. I mean, it's certainly at this point a rich world problem because I don't see that many middle to low income countries can sort of sustain an infrastructure for biomarker diagnoses and structural imaging and whatnot. But at the same time, detecting early stage cognitive decline has value, right? Like there's lifestyle modifications, there are reversible causes, there's things you can do, you can adjust your life. It's not as great as treating it, but it's still worth sort of looking for these cases rather than detecting them like my unfortunate father-in-law in the course of a motor vehicle accident. So.
I just wanted to add something because I agree with both of you, and I think and I disagree at the same time, and I want to clarify. So I agree that just increasing screening rates doesn't make any sense. So this high-level aim of DUC is a bit silly, and that's not going to solve anything. It's going to create new problems. But at the same time, I think the targeted kind of precision medicine, oncology, type identification of very early stage Alzheimer's disease, or those who would benefit from those expensive drugs, makes perfect sense. Because how else would you identify those who will? I mean, how would you treat individuals if, let's say, next year lecanemab is on the market? So I think we need a system, and it's much more than just identifying early cognitive impairments, identifying early Alzheimer's disease, and those who would benefit from the treatment.
And I think what we're seeing, it's not, I think while it is looking at kind of broader screening and using tools to kind of accelerate that detection, I think the idea is to ensure that it's kind of a triaging. So you're trying to kind of narrow down the funnel, because the challenge that we're seeing from primary care to specialty is that every patient is getting referred. And a number of those patients probably may not have Alzheimer's disease, may not have dementia. So I think the value is, especially early on, will just be kind of narrowing down that funnel, freeing up a bit of capacity, which we know is super stretched. And as the development of blood-based biomarkers continue, you have more accurate tools, and they potentially, with greater accuracy, can replace PET or CSF. Then you can kind of allow the kind of moving of this kind of detection and confirmatory diagnosis earlier. But I think in this early stage, it's really to allow kind of addressing some of that specialist capacity constraint that exists.
Yeah, and my analogy is hepatitis C, because initially there was the problem, okay, some drugs only work on certain genotypes, you can't be further along than stage 4 fibrosis, and that became harder and harder for low and middle income countries to implement because they had no genotyping and no quantitative sonography. But then the treatments actually became broad enough that you could just treat no matter what, as long as somebody still had detectable viral load. And eventually we will get there, probably not this year or next, but at some point we will probably also get to simpler Alzheimer's treatment, like subcutaneous injection as a first step. There are some oral drugs on the market. There's semaglutide, which is not a super complicated drug, and it's widely used for diabetes. So this is going to be much better really fast, and then we will be able to scale it from high-income countries to middle and then eventually lower-income countries. I think Jean-Georges, you had a comment?
So my name is Jean-Georges, I'm the director of Alzheimer Europe. And you also asked a bit for experiences and how the situation is in different European countries. And as Alzheimer Europe, we carried out a survey of carers in 5 European countries and really trying to understand what are the barriers that they experienced before getting a diagnosis. And this was a diagnosis of dementia, not of mild cognitive impairment or any of the earlier stages. They reported in the 5 countries that on average it took about 20 months from them noticing something in the family or in the person that they ended up caring for until getting a diagnosis. And then the reasons for that were that the family didn't recognize straight away that these symptoms that they saw were significant enough to actually merit seeing a doctor. Sometimes it was the person themselves that didn't want to confront the disease because they were afraid of the potential diagnosis that they might be getting because of the stigma attached still to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. When they finally managed to get the family together and see a GP, very often GPs, the first thing was not to worry about this is a normal part of aging, I wouldn't worry too much about it. So they again delayed it. When they finally convinced the GP to become active, then they met all the kind of obstacles that you're talking about referral to specialists, seeing a specialist, a memory clinic, getting a scan and so on. So if we want to change the system, so you're now going to tell, or we should be telling a policymaker, we need to change this system. But there's not one button we need to press, but we need to work on awareness, we need to work on stigma, we need to work on GP education, we need to work on system preparedness. How should policymakers start investing their money in the best way to get the most results?
Yeah, I mean, this is precisely what we are trying to figure out, and I think the answer depends a little bit on the jurisdiction, because in some countries like the US, there is no payment for a brief cognitive test. And so what you hear often from primary care docs, like 15 minutes for a mini mental that I'm not getting paid, I'm under pressure to deliver revenues, so I can't really do that routinely. I will do it if somebody insists, and that of course means that is one where the family has already ganged up on the doctor and he has no choice but to do a mini mental because they won't leave. But that's really not what we would like to see in the future. So their payment system reform, pay for performance measures could improve the situation, but that still doesn't deal with patient reluctance, downplaying of symptoms, and all these other obstacles. It is really complicated, but we had a similar situation with advanced cancers, right? That the consensus was, well, if you had pancreatic cancer, don't talk too much about it, give pain therapy because you can't do anything. And I think that's just philosophically wrong, because we should not, as physicians, make that decision for our patients, what they can and cannot learn. We got to give them the information and then help them make the best out of their lives and the time that they have left. So how do we change that? Any creative ideas? Any examples from your own countries, from your practice?
Ideas, but just a comment, because the survey is really interesting. In my darkest hours, I sometimes think that people are just not interested in an early Alzheimer's disease diagnosis because it increases the stress and burden on them. And this view is actually supported by the primary care physicians that I talk to. So when I give a presentation to primary care physicians and I ask them, would you be interested and motivated to provide cognitive screening and kind of early recognition of early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, they're quite concerned, and they tend to say that they don't want to do it because it increases the pressure on their patients, and maybe that's actually not the case, and we have to increase awareness of these issues. And that might drastically change with the drug, or it will probably drastically change with a disease-modifying drug.
I have a comment, John, in terms of your question around where should governments be investing. So I think there's probably a longer-term investment, and then I think more immediate investments that are needed. And there was a recent EPI study published in Journal of Alzheimer's Dementia by Project Alzheimer's Value Europe that showed the greatest prevalence of the disease is in this preclinical stage, or those at risk. And so if you look at how do you kind of like change that trajectory of the prevalence, is really looking at public health, prevention, public health awareness. But as we know, these things oftentimes are underfunded. They get kind of deprioritized, in exchange for kind of more urgent healthcare investments. And so this is one way, right, around brain health education, risk reduction. I mean, the data is quite compelling if you start these things earlier. In terms of the more kind of immediate kind of investments for healthcare system preparedness, I think it's obviously provide reimbursement, access to integration of advanced diagnostics within the clinical pathway. I mean, one step would actually be developing and adopting an actual AD clinical pathway. This would probably go some way. But I think, there's a lot of the work I think that Soeren has done, and, other researchers have done, show that there are some actual meaningful tweaks or changes that can be done that can really kind of smooth out how that person living with Alzheimer's disease can move through the healthcare system. It's not going to be transformation. We know transformation in healthcare takes decades, and probably with the advent of these modifying therapies coming onto market, this will be some of the push. But I think there are some changes dependent on the country where you can smooth out that pathway, which could actually be very helpful. And with some additional resources, I think this could actually provide a huge impact for people living with the disease.
Please.
Alexander Kurz again. Don't get me wrong, I think in improving diagnosis and having earlier diagnosis is a very good thing. But another point that I would like to make is, as far as I understand, talking about disease-modifying treatment will be available soon, next year. That sounds very nice. And it sounds very simple, but when I look at the data as far as I understand them, these disease-modifying treatments, they don't improve anything. They just slow down the progression of the disease and hopefully also the progression of symptoms. Now, if I consider that the average life expectancy of a person diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease from the point of diagnosis to death is approximately 6, maybe 8 years. Now prolong that by 30%, which may be the effect of the drugs. Then you have, instead of 6 years, you have 9 years. So what we are prolonging by having these treatments is the duration that people spend in the disease. So it's not only the cost for the treatment that is increased, but also the cost of care. And if I would be the person offered a treatment like this, I would say, okay, I will live with the disease 3 years longer than I would normally do without treatment, but what happens to me in those 3 additional years? The drugs don't improve my life, so something else must happen. And therefore, I think having a disease-modifying treatment also requires to have a life-modifying care.
Well, I would slightly disagree because, retaining somebody at MCI for 3 more years is a big, big difference from having somebody progress to mild and moderate with severe loss of ADLs and care dependency and whatnot. And for better or worse, we are talking about the elderly here, mostly with other advanced chronic illness. So with a little luck, somebody dies peacefully in their sleep from a heart attack while still living at home rather than in these ghastly nursing facilities. And I don't think the current generation is our answer when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, but if you look at other therapeutic areas like oncology, immunology, and whatnot, I mean, it started with treatments like in cancer. When I trained in internal medicine, the treatment was often worse than the disease. And now many cancers, even in advanced stages, are chronic conditions. We don't deal with it, we don't cure it, but people have pretty decent quality of life and just live with their cancer going on. And I think we will get there. I mean, once we have the first generation of treatments, you will get enormous amounts of data about the disease that we've never ever had before because we never really tried this at scale. We will get money because this is going to be a very widely used drug and not cheap. And we will get talent because right now it's a labor of love, like Lydia's, to be in Alzheimer's disease. It's a high-risk career move because 8 out of 9 trials failed and then you have invested 5 years of your life for nothing. So I think this will fundamentally transform the way we approach pharmacologic treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And yep, these are not great drugs, but these are good drugs, and we will get to even better drugs.
If I may add, so very true what you said, Alexander, but also very provocative and oversimplified. And you know that. And I would personally prefer to stay 3 years longer in the MCI stage, any day.
Yeah, but you will also stay longer in the dementia stage.
Well, I mean, you have some sort of compression if you look at the mortality risk by dementia stage. So once you go to advanced stages, you die faster. So pretty much you have the competing risk of your natural life expectancy given your underlying disease versus the competing risk of dementia progression. How this will play out, we will really only know once we treat larger numbers of people, because the trial participants are sort of purebred Alzheimer's, right? Nothing else, very clean, relatively young. So it's relatively hard to project how this will play out in larger populations, but there's no other way but trying it. The lady in the back.
Hello, one comment from low-income country, from Poland. I'm a vice president of Alzheimer Polska, a new member of Alzheimer Europe. And I would like to say that in Poland, when you are a patient with mild cognitive impairment, you are looking for a drug because there are little clinics, departments, neurology departments, sometimes got a special room for patients with memory loss, but it's rare. And they are looking for clinical trials. And when you've got MCI and you've got a partner, it's not a caregiver, quite often they even don't live with the person with disability. They are looking for being cured, these persons, and the assessment, the cognitive assessments, they are better and better. I'm working for 20 years in clinical trials. but the tests are old and are the same, almost the same for these years. And even mini mental state examinations get some different parts of assessing the cognitive functions, the memory, the orientation, and sometimes these fields are more disabled in different persons, especially in mild cognitive impairment. And the second thing is the partner. At the start, when they start to be in the clinical trial, they are very, very interesting, and they assess them like almost healthy person. And after a year, when we as raters see them even not changed, he of course is diagnosed because mild cognitive impairment plus MRI and other markers says it's dementia, it's Alzheimer's disease, but the carer starts to see it's not a success. He is still ill, so they assess them for being more disabled than they are real in their real everyday living lives. And I think that they are waiting for a drug, but something must change in clinical trials if we have a new drug, because these tests maybe are good, but not always through the whole clinical trial. Thank you.
This is a fascinating point, and it again confirms the view of the GPs that I talk to. So apparently, because of the stigma associated with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, having the biomarker information increases the burden on the caregivers, and they start treating the loved one as patients and not as ordinary people, which is quite shocking, and which again, I mean, we need to change the entire system. We need to change how we talk and think about dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and hopefully treating Alzheimer's disease as a disease and not just as a kind of syndrome or something or just as this stigmatized thing that we can't treat, will hopefully change the situation a little bit. But it's that's quite interesting what you just said, I think.
And I don't know, Robert, if you want to give just maybe a comment. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts around the comment around cognitive assessment tools, the currently available ones, MOCA, MMSE. I think we know that they can be quite subjective. Also, if they're used in primary care and perhaps a GP isn't administering them on a regular basis, the accuracy can kind of go down, right? So I think this is where we really see that need to be able to have something that can be done at scale. Can you provide a digital biomarker or a digital test that can be used quickly, perhaps administered by a different healthcare professional? So it's, I think we see this in other specialties where you have nurses, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants really involved in kind of like the diagnostic workup to provide kind of the holistic kind of measures that can then be used to initiate a treatment decision.
Because one important point is that we shouldn't aim to provide population-based cognitive screening to healthy older individuals. That doesn't make any sense, I think. So the brain health clinics that Craig mentioned, I think the general idea is to do risk profiling, and for individuals with certain risk profiles, you do a more in-depth cognitive assessment, and digital biomarkers may be the future, but that's the future, it's not the current situation. And then blood biomarkers in primary care are an even more distant future, I believe. So that will start, we're not even at a point where those markers can be used reliably in specialized memory clinics. That will be the next step, and that will happen very soon, I think. And then we need to roll out more of those markers, biomarkers and digital cognitive tests into kind of primary care medicine, which is not always a general practitioner, as you said. Could be a specialized nurse, such as in the NHS in the UK. You're lucky if you see a GP. Most of the time, it's not even a GP.
Jean?
So another comment, unfortunately, from the same bench here. So we can also learn from the launch of the first class of drugs that were launched for Alzheimer's disease, and also when acetylcholinesterase inhibitors were launched in different countries. companies were sometimes very good at doing it and sometimes a lot less good at doing it. And I give you two examples of the same company, which I won't name, and which launched their product in 2 different countries. In one, they focused on doing a huge awareness campaign so that people on television saw information about Alzheimer's disease and it would be a good idea to go and see a doctor. They had not talked to GPs or anybody, they had not talked to the Alzheimer's Society, and they suddenly created a huge demand from people to go forward, and the system was not ready at all to deal with any of the questions that were coming up. The same company in another country had discussions with the Alzheimer's Society, supported the Alzheimer's Society to develop their telephone helpline. They had a campaign with the National GP Association to prepare them for the campaign that they were launching about if you have memory issues, go and see a doctor, because there might be things that we might be able to offer you. And the kind of launch was completely different because the demand created in one was met with no added infrastructure, and in the other country the infrastructure was slightly enhanced so that they could actually cope with the new demand for these new medicines. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think this speaks to the benefit and the need for collaboration. And no one company can do it alone. No one clinic can do it alone. No one Alzheimer's Association can do it alone. And so I think this is where we see where we kind of see the value, right? And we are able to actually see the development of solutions is not by a company kind of going out and saying, we're going to launch this campaign by ourselves, focused on our individual drug, but rather working with other companies. I know, the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative has a number of companies that are involved and at the table. Roche, we work very closely with Eli Lilly, with Biogen, with Eisai, et cetera, on some of these bigger kind of health system issues, these policy issues, and work with the community to develop that. So I think it's not, like I said, there's no one silver bullet, no one has all the answers, and this is where you actually have a lot of the values through that collaboration.
Just to support the point that you just made, when I was working in the UK, so the NHS decided a couple of years back to pay GPs per referral to a memory clinic, £47 or £56 or something like that. And I wasted 12 months of my professional life talking to 40-year-old stressed professionals because they were referred by their GPs for a assessment, and we had long waiting times for the people that actually needed us. So managing expectations and very, very careful communication, I think, is key.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Becker. I'm director from Alzheimer, not Europe, not yet. Switzerland. Switzerland.
Heard here first,
which is
folks.
not part of the EU thing. So I just want to come back to the keyword communication. I think bridging the different aspects we were talking about, also the bottlenecks, communication is all about. If I look at the media, especially in Switzerland, where, as you might know, where the obstacles of the treatment may be available are very much in the public media. I think the media also creates opinions, and opinions means that people are reluctant to go to, even more reluctant to go to see their GP. They are more reluctant or not at all interested in participation in research which will still be important for any other development coming up. So I think it's really, really important how we talk about the results and what they can and what they can't. So, and I think this is something which we all should respect and also work and advocate and with the media for a real objective communication about the drugs coming out.
I think you raise a really good point. And as we're starting to see trial readouts, and I think it's really important to be as objective as you can, transparent as you can within the limits, and be really clear about what the population is under study, what was actually observed. And there'll be a lot of questions and a lot of discussions, but I think as drug developers, we really try to aim to develop really good and design sound trials that can provide those kind of scientifically relevant questions or answers to those questions, and try to report those results in an objective way. We also have seen through the media that there's kind of ebbs and flows in terms of media interest in dementia, as we've seen, with every trial failure or trial success, it kind of goes up and down. And so we've found, and probably you've seen this as well, that the media aren't totally educated on Alzheimer's disease. The reporting is, especially in kind of like the consumer media, doesn't necessarily reflect where the field now is versus maybe where it was. It's a hard time interpreting kind of scientific results into kind of lay language. So I think it probably behooves all of us to ensure, and when we have the opportunities, to provide kind of really sound education on what this disease is, how it affects people living with it, what the stages of disease are, because I think this will then impact, as you said, how they're reporting on it and how opinions are shaped about it.
Okay, we are at the end of our time, so this was a fascinating discussion. Just remember, and as you go away, we have done this transformation in many, many other aspects of medical care, like immunology, cardiology, dermatology, and what have you, where we went from pretty poor and undifferentiated treatments to highly effective tailored treatments, and we managed that transition. So we will manage it for Alzheimer's disease too. The only thing is we go from 0 to 100 in next to no time, because we don't have the luxury like in other diseases where we had some treatment where we could sort of manage on while the system adapted to these new modalities. But we have to make that work, because the alternative is to let a progressive neurodegenerative disease just burn on while we figure things out. And I think we all need to do better than that. And with that, I wish you a pleasant rest of the conference.